The policy basically talks about the scope, why we do the screening, what the screening involves, who from the team is involved in doing the screening process. Criteria, I feel like it's very important to have agreements on what kind of verification we're going to do on individuals so we don't have back and forths and avoid potential litigations. So that's why we have that mentioned in the policy.
So welcome, Tatiana. You are the first guest, subject matter expert for this new series that the CMMC Proof is kicking off, calling it our live system security plan. So we can actually demonstrate how to satisfy the CMMC requirements, not just talking about them, but demonstrating how it's done. So thrilled to have you join us. How are you, Tatiana?
I'm very good. I feel very honored to be invited, especially as the first guest. I have a special passion for cybersecurity. I really enjoy practicing. I really enjoy educating myself about the best cybersecurity practices. So I feel fantastic being here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. That makes two of us. Cool. So can you tell viewers a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Starting with my education, I got my first master's at University of Portland. I have a master's degree in science in operations and technology management, and that's where I found my true passion for cybersecurity. Recently, actually started a second master's at Harvard Extension that specializes in cybersecurity. And currently, I'm in the role of Director of Information Security and Operations at an accounting firm that is based in California.
Wow. That's impressive. A thirst for learning.
Definitely.
What experience do you have with various security frameworks?
I would say my most experience revolves around SOC 2 specifically. I've successfully completed 3 rounds of SOC 2. I'm learning and educating myself currently about CMMC, and my long-term goal is potentially to become an expert in CMMC as well.
Right. That's a good goal. The CMMC is new. Going to have a big impact in the federal government, and anticipate seeing it spread throughout state governments, local organizations. As you were reading through the personnel security requirements for CMMC, did you notice any overlap?
Oh, absolutely.
To like SOC 2?
Absolutely. It felt like I'm reading through the description of personnel requirements for SOC 2. That actually has been my experience for documentation for multiple security frames I read through just out of pure curiosity and for comparison purposes. There's a lot of overlap between them. I think some of them maybe have additional areas that focus on the specific requirements for that area of cybersecurity. So in the CMMC's case, I assume we would have more technical details related to, defense and, requirements related to government. But for the most part, if we are to truly focus just on the people hiring part, the similarities are striking. They're almost identical with SOC.
Yeah, agree. Lots of overlap. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I think we're ready to jump into the role play.
I'm excited.
So, hi, Tatiana. I appreciate you bringing us in, Aspire Cyber, to perform your CMMC Level 2 certification assessment for Marin Defense, Inc. And I know, looking forward to learning more about your controls. Your CISO told me that you are providing responses for the personnel security. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Let's do it. Fortunately for CMMC, there's not a lot of personnel security. It's only 2 requirements with the associated assessment objectives. But I'm glad I'm talking to the right person who can give me the information I need to determine if you all have satisfied the requirements. And while I pull up the assessment tool I'm going to be using, can you tell me more about your company?
Absolutely. So Marin Defense is a mid-sized defense contractor that is primarily focused on national security, and they focus a lot on security communication, advanced data analytics, system integration for the Department of Federal Agencies. And right now we have about 500 people working for us full-time.
Wow. Pretty large company. You all must be doing something right. You're pretty successful.
A lot of money out there.
Yeah. It's a team effort for our national security and supporting our warfighters.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so I pulled up the assessment tool we're going to be using. It's called CMMC Proof. And right now I'm showing the 2 personnel security requirements that are both part of CMMC Level 1 and Level 2. really the scope of this requirement is around how you all are handling onboarding. So for 3.9.1, screening individuals.
Yeah.
So I'm going to actually kind of talk me through how your company handles screening personnel, and then let me know once you're ready to share any applicable evidence, and I'll.
Absolutely. The process starts with the need for a new position to be created. And the hiring manager communicates that to HR. HR creates a job code that reflects the requirement access level. We have our policy as a company is to be zero trust architecture and role-based access control. And because of that, the process starts with the steps I mentioned. After the job code is created, HR issues a conditional offer of employment or contract pending a successful background screening. And the screening is initiated through a system called Checker. I'm sure it's very common. A lot of companies out there use it. And
I've heard of it.
Yeah, and we screen for federal, state, and local criminal check, Interpol screening, employment and education verification, reference check, and we also require the new hire to sign an NDA with us. And once the HR receive the completed background, which usually takes 2 to 3 weeks, they check for any potential flags. If there are no flags of any kind or none that we care about, we transition that screening to our CISO. CISO reviews and makes final decision on the new hire and either releases the approval for the new hire or not. So the final decision maker is really our CISO. And once the CISO approves, the documentation is transitioned to our tech team. And from there, based on the job code created for this particular role, the new user gets a very specific kind of access. So that's kind of top to bottom process. And then we can go.
Wow. That seems pretty robust and comprehensive. And I'm impressed you remember all of those steps.
I'm trying my best.
It's awesome.
Are you feeling overwhelmed by the complex world of CMMC compliance? You're not alone. Small to mid-sized defense contractors are often swamped by the massive list of requirements, unsure of where to begin, lacking resources, and fearing assessment failure. But there's a solution. CMMC Proof, your compliance acceleration system. Unlike typical GRC tools, CMMC Proof breaks down the process into 5 easy-to-follow phases, guiding you through each step of your compliance journey. With everything you need in one place, from CMMC Level 1 and 2 requirements to evidence tracking and more, you'll never feel lost again. Get CMMC compliant faster and easier than ever before. Our system ensures nothing is missed, saving you time and effort. Built by CMMC certified assessors with decades of experience, CMMC Proof delivers real-world expertise and guidance you can trust. By the time your assessment comes, you won't just be ready, you'll be confident. Visit CMMCproof.com to start your 7-day free trial and accelerate your CMMC compliance today.
Now, you did mention that with Checker, you're doing the background check, and if there are no, I guess, red flags, what are some of those red flags that would?
We definitely don't want people that have a criminal background of any kind. We had an instance when someone was flagged for holding unregistered firearms, and they were collectibles, but still, just because they were not registered, we could not trust enough this user to start with us. So that's kind of like a classic example of maybe not a criminal offense, yet something that we really watch for, especially because of the area of activity of our company.
Yes, I can imagine.
And I know
integrity is very important.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of companies feel like when you check references, of course, you're going to only hear good things. But we have instances when the references were not professional references and they were just like friends or family members. And that was a flag on its own for us. It meant that this individual does not have established past relationship in their job history. So we look deeper into that, and we identified that we can't work with this individual. Not discrimination because he didn't have contacts from past jobs, but that was a flag that made us think of additional layers we need to investigate.
Okay, understood. Now, as we see with the requirement, it emphasizes the screening is prior to authorizing access. You walk me through that flow and approval.
Yeah.
Is there a way for IT to pretty much give someone access to the system without going through that background check? Bypass?
Unfortunately for them, unfortunately for the rest of the team, that is not possible. There's a sequence of very strict and rigid kind of checklists we go through for every new hire. And I actually have a sample that I can share.
Happy to hear you have a documented process that everyone's not relying on memory like wouldn't expect to know it inside out like you do. So it's good to have a documented process. And for CMMC Level 2, that is a requirement. As an assessor, clearly you have the process down, but I need to see evidence in forms of policy, things like that.
Awesome. So this is the policy that we follow that kind of talks about the process for us. The policy basically talks about the scope, why we do the screening, what the screening involves, who from the team is involved in doing the screening process. Criteria, I feel like it's very important to have agreement on what kind of verification we're going to do on individuals so we don't have back and forths and avoid potential litigations. So that's why we have that mentioned in the policy. And then we also state in the policy on specific naming conventions we use for the job codes. So look, since, we provide access based on role, the rest is kind of standard. The timeline, how long the background takes, who does what during the screening process, how we keep our documents, and for how long. This is a requirement related to HR specifically and our industry.
Okay.
So kind of the rest is kind of pretty standard. And then we document when the policy changed or if it changed in any way and who authorized it. So we have logs for versioning for the policy as well, considering the consequences of changing these rules can be dramatic for us as a business.
I would say this is one that's commonly overlooked by organizations. They may have a policy, but they don't have version control. Yeah. It's not signed off by the sponsor.
Yeah.
So happy to see that you have that incorporated into your policy.
Excellent. I mentioned that we go by very rigid checklists and when we screen. So, and again, checklists are based on policies. The reason we have checklists is because we noticed, through our history as a company that people have a hard time reading documents that are long and retaining, just paragraphs of data. Every time we implement a policy or changes in the policy, we update the policy along with the checklist. And I'm going to share the sample of checklist that we have for screening.
And on that note, outside of GRC professionals, people hate reading policies or lawyers.
Yes.
The checklists are helpful.
It's true. Again, we have very specific naming convention for all our documents so we can have effective searches in our system. And the headers on all our documents are pretty consistent for that purpose. And, since we have a multitude of documents, we always make sure to indicate the purpose and the scope of the specific document. And then we go through the specific checklist. And
wow,
as you can see, we have conditional offer, but it's conditional based on the result from the background check. And then we go through the types of verifications that we do. And basically, we cover all the details that we talk in the policy through this checklist to make sure we complete everything. And then the checklist is reviewed and approved as kind of the final approver by the CISO, since the CISO role makes the decision whether someone gets hired or not.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. And then once this document is completed for a new employee, where is it stored?
Yes, so we have cloud storage that also has access that is role-based, and it has sections that are accessible only to HR, only to CISO. Based on your department and your role, you're going to have clearance to have access to specific areas of our cloud storage.
And for CMMC, it is a data-centric framework. So for level 2, the controlled unclassified information is really what's in purview or scope for this assessment. You mentioned the number of employees you have. How many would you estimate actually are granted access to the CUI?
I think I would have to verify that in our system. We have a matrix that gets updated as a new hire gets added to the roster. And we can do searches based on the clearance level and identify the exact number. I don't have that available for this call, but I can request, because it's such sensitive information. I might not have the clearance to share it with you. I would need the CISO approval and probably someone from the tech team that controls that matrix from being changed in altered in any possible way to get on a call with you and share that.
Certainly look forward to following up with your CISO, but that's good to know that you may not even have that access. So that goes to show that you all enforcing that role-based access control. Excellent. Which is what I was looking to see.
I was supposed to get tricked and I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't fall for it. So let's see. Going back to the actual assessment tool, you can see, so the way it breaks down for personnel security, we have two requirements. So this 3.9.1, 3.9.2. And then you'll see each requirement has corresponding assessment objectives. So me as the assessor, I'm gathering all this information and speaking with yourself, the subject matter expert, to determine ultimately, is the requirement is met, or is it not met, or is it NA? As we look through, we pull up some actual example from the tool. You see where it mentions about doing a standard criminal background check.
Yeah.
You showed me that. It mentioned about as far as the various policies related to onboarding and offboarding. So you showed me that as well. So at this point, based on your responses and based on evidence that you provided, I feel confident marking this requirement as
excellent.
So one down, one more to go.
Good.
Off to a good start. Now, next up, we have personnel actions. So the organization system contains CUI are protected during and after any personnel actions such as terminations and transfers.
Yeah.
So talk to me about how you all handle whenever someone is terminated and offboarding them, or if someone's transferred to a new role where they no longer need access to CUI.
Yes, it's fantastic that you mentioned transferring to a different role. I'm sharing this purely from experience. I've heard and seen in the past in other agencies that should not be named on this call that the access is not shut down completely when transitioning to a new role, and that's how gaps happen. People end up having access like they are not supposed to in different roles. For example, transitioning from HR into recruiting, for example, access should be very different for those roles. So yeah, we put rigor into role transitioning as well. So I'm going to start with screening individuals. So we first identify the position, then we extend the offer. If all the criteria of verification of this individual pass, we initiate the screening. Once the screening is completed, the screening is reviewed by CISO, they get approved, then they get started on their role, and then IT gives them access. For the terminations, first we get the notification from HR, and we make record of that, and we make transfer of existing documentation, like the checklist of the kind of access this person had, the kind of responsibility they had, with details including effective date of immediate termination or transfer. And then we open a ticket with all this information with our technical team, because we keep record of all these transitions. And if it's a termination based on the termination date, IT immediately follows a checklist that addresses the VPN deactivation, the Active Directory deactivation, all their email and other communication tools, all the access to the classified information they have access to. And all of that happens within our guidelines. Is usually 4 hours, but we generally try to do that in real time and not go beyond 1 hour.
That's impressive.
The other steps that are taken, since our agency functions mostly on premises, we make sure that the employee returns the laptop, company issued phone, any external storage devices that they might have been issued. And we kind of freeze all the existing logs related to this individual, just in case, until we get the green light to eventually put them in our archives and in the due time to delete them. And all the transferred archived information, depending on their level of access to information, to the type of information they have access to, we either wipe their information or again keep it for a period of time Again, it depends on the clearance. If they were working on sensitive projects, we don't want all the data and everything they produce to disappear overnight. So that's why it depends on the role.
Have you had an experience where employee that was terminated didn't want to return their equipment?
Yes. So we have practices in place and tools in place to prevent situations when we lose control over our data. So as soon as the tech team receives notice that someone is to be terminated or they're departing the company, they put a clock in place on their device, and the device gets wiped out starting at the specific time. So whether they keep or not keep the laptop matters very little, because the computer gets fried from the inside. It's not effective in repurposing equipment, but we prefer to be safe than sorry. So we put these measures in place.
Okay. And I would imagine, as far as artifacts that you can share to give us an overview of that process.
This is the policy of offboarding and transferring hires or employees. And again, same naming convention. What is the policy about? The scope, steps of, that we take in the process, kind of like summarizing what we do. And if it's a transfer, we have different steps, and we kind of demonstrate these steps as well. And also, we all agree on who is going to take care of what, so we don't have things slip through the cracks accidentally.
Very important.
Yeah. And that's kind of brief to the point. That's our policy. We do an exit interview. So this is the template that we follow for departing.
Can you talk to us more about the goal of that exit interview?
Again, because of the area where we operate, it's very important for us to make an assessment, if possible, if someone is leaving on kind of bad terms or they leave as a disgruntled employee. And we want to always make sure that things related to management are addressed, or the company culture in general, and why that is important. If you have a manager, for example, that is not treating their employees right in one way or another, or the employee is scared to talk, but they observe things that the manager does or one of their colleagues does, and they're not feeling comfortable being in that environment, it's critical that we take notice of that and address it. Right. So we prevent data being shared from the inside. We make sure that if that employee is leaving kind of upset with the company, we address it if we can in that interview to improve their relationship if possible. Again, while they might not take physical evidence with them, they're leaving with knowledge, and making sure that we keep the relationship at the end healthy and positive as much as possible is kind of critical. People tend to be nicer to places of employment they departed on positive or somewhat positive note. They're taking the knowledge, they can just like share it over beer with a friend and put us in a bad position and not think about the NDA in that moment. So reminding them about the NDA, making sure we reestablish that relationship we have with them. So kind of the human side of termination. That's the purpose of that interview.
Absolutely love that. And I think it's great that you want to get their insights, because it may be information, historical knowledge they're going to be taking, or insights that they may have that will be valuable to the company, whether it is a overbearing manager or someone who they didn't feel comfortable speaking up while they were an employee, but now they're leaving.
Yeah.
And tell you all of the tea to reveal the scoop. So yeah, that is something invaluable. And you read my mind about the NDA. It is important to remind employees that they have signed a non-disclosure agreement when they first onboarded, and they're still bound to that contractually.
Yeah.
Go out, share the company's IP and other sensitive information.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. And I know prior to me arriving on, or prior to us kicking off this assessment, you had sent me some of your documents. Are there any other documents that you want to share?
This is kind of a small sample, but maybe it's effective at demonstrating what a checklist for access revocation should look like.
Okay, great.
Generally,
we like bonuses.
Yeah, thank you. This isn't an Excel file, but generally I would recommend to have this in a system that allows ticketing and allows searching for specific tickets based on naming conventions or timelines. In case of a crisis or in case of an investigation, that information can be easily found. We do also generally recommend keeping just PDF copies of these in the cloud storage or any other storage you have. Again, things happen, and cloud storage is not without faults, servers can go down. And that's why having copies in multiple medias for sensitive data like that can be important.
We don't want to put all our sensitive data in one basket.
That's absolutely it. So this is the system revocation. Again, this is a small sample. So again, normally this list would be substantially longer. For the purpose of this call, I used someone with lower clearance, and that way, the list tends to be shorter as well.
I will say that for a company of your size, you'll have really good governance in place and documentation. I've assessed much larger organizations that they didn't have documentation.
One maybe additional document that we find it useful like within our company is to have a description of what documents we have, their codes, and what they're for, especially when you have people in new roles. Let's say someone starts as our new CISO, coming in and just seeing a whole bunch of codes or people talking in document codes over company meetings doesn't necessarily make sense to them. So we have descriptions, we have documentation of the documentation, and I'll share the sample that we have in place. And again, this is used for education purposes for our team. So when someone new starts, where someone maybe hasn't done a task in a long time, they can reference this document and understand what these codes are, since all our documents have codes. That's how we kind of search for them in our system as well. So that's the other thing we do. Yeah.
Very useful, especially for someone coming in new.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that those are all the samples I got for the call today.
More than adequate. There are a few follow-up questions I have. So again, we're on 3.9.2. You demonstrate the policy and the checklist. That was good. Credentials are terminated. Mentioned that. So in regards to like those tickets and tracking them, what tool are y'all using for you?
I would need to check with the technical team. I don't have a direct view in the tool they have. I'm more of a coordinator between the HR, CISO, and the tech team. But I can pull them in the conversation, and they can respond directly through a ticket. So we have evidence on how the ticketing system works, and they can talk about the specific tool they use.
Oh, likely be my follow-up session with you when we meet again is look at some of those actual tickets, because I see y'all have the policy, you have the checklist. Now it's like, okay, show me that it's actually being done.
Absolutely.
So that's the only thing I say would still be the last cherry on top of the cake. Yeah. You elaborate more on transfer. I know you touched on it earlier, but let's say the CISO, for example, is transferred, he gets promoted, he or she gets promoted, and they become the CIO of the company. Or let's say that they go to a kind of a different role. There could be the VP development, business development.
Yeah.
How do you I know you use roles to assign to them, but is there an auditing process in place that's done to make sure that people don't have more access than they need?
All our systems are part of our SSO environment, and the SSO environment is structured around job codes. When you get transferred to a new role, and actually we have a real example in our company, when someone transitioned from CIO to CTO, the CTO has very different clearance. The role has access to more technical aspects of the business versus, a project management aspect and coordination and collaboration with the executive team. Because of that, as soon as someone is ready to transition to a new role and their job code in our SSO system changes, their access changes with that. It's kind of automatic.
Wow.
That way we prevent accidental access being left behind. We have a few exceptions of systems that, unfortunately, due to technical shortcomings, that's how the systems were designed, are not integrating the same way with our SSO system. But those systems are kind of like in their own little watch list, and we audit those systems on a yearly basis. And again, when you transition in your new role, your new role has its own template of onboarding. And it's a checklist, and you make sure that role gets access to everything. Same for offboarding. So technically, if someone is transitioning to a new role, they're offboarding from one role and onboarding to a new role. So they have a card for offboarding, and everything has to be completed before they get the new card for onboarding. If their boarding card said that they had access to those two systems that are not part of our normal SSO, they get removed from there, on top of, the yearly audit we do all of those two systems. Same for the transition. If their prior role didn't have access to those, but their onboarding card says that they need access, they get added to that to those.
Okay, so layers of defense, and you have both administrative and technical controls in place.
We found that the process has been very, very effective and consistent and clean since we start having a dedicated team member that is responsible for onboardings and offboardings. They know their job very well. They become extremely trained on all the systems. You can ask them any question about types of roles and accesses you can get in those systems, and they'll know the answer. They don't necessarily complete all the tasks, but they're in charge of that process, and they coordinate with the technical team. So they're in charge of collaborating with the technical team to make sure that the checklists are completed, and they have to sign, I completed this checklist at the end.
So Tatiana, I think our session is very productive. Your CISO will be happy to know that we are currently trending as met. And the reason I say trending, I do have some follow-up action items and requests. We'll need to speak to the CISO in regards to the actual ticket tool the tool you're using for ticket tracking. Actually see some of those tickets where you completed onboarding of a new employee and also completed offboarding. So you completed exit interview, and you can't redact that information. Like, I don't necessarily need to see the employee's name, things like that, any sensitive information, but just to see that it is being done. But based on what you showed me today and what you've told me, I'm confident that I'll be able to get that information, those follow-up action items completed relatively quickly and continue on with you all's assessment. I would say y'all are on the right track. You're looking good.
Fantastic. That's what we strive for. Thank you.
So this final part, I'll consider call this kind of like our bonus or lightning round, where you just really share just some tips, insights that someone who is maybe new to this role for their company, where they're going to be responsible for being interviewed during their CMMC certification assessment. They're going to be responsible for showing the evidence and putting in the tools, the systems, the governance in place. What tips do you have for them?
Checklists. I cannot say this enough. Checklists for everything. In my first master degree, actually, in one of the operations classes I took, we read through a case study that was actually talking about the medical industry. They were talking specifically about surgeons, and they noticed that the amount of litigations they have for surgeons that follow checklists, very rigid checklists, is substantially lower versus, the surgeons that don't follow checklists. Because with the expertise, sometimes you feel like, oh, I know it all, but we're all humans and forget. And especially when you work in the defense industry or any other industry, like if you must be HIPAA compliant and all that stuff, like sensitive areas like that, having checklists prevents you from accidentally oversharing or forgetting or leaving things behind. Other thing that we do at the company that I work for, we have cybersecurity events schedules. So, and the operations team that helps me with that and the tech team is invited. So it's an ongoing invitation. And every 3 months, we know that we have a list of systems we go through, and we look at the departed employees for the last 3 months or 6 months, whenever we do those. And they check in those sensitive systems for those names if they were not accidentally left behind, even though we follow checklists, even though we work with a technical team that is highly skilled and, do a great job at what they do. We still have additional levels of rigor that we follow. So checklist, then having the scheduled events where you just know, okay, a month from now, I'm going to do an audit. I'm going to assign time on my calendar and not take other projects on because I need to verify those. Having assigned tasks to specific people, so being the owner of tasks, is something we talked about, and I found it to be extremely effective. People take pride in what they do, and them being appreciated for doing a great job at auditing systems or at following and keeping clean lists of onboardings and offboardings, anything it is, if you're the owner, you're more likely to take pride into that and do it well. When you don't know, ask questions, work with professionals, don't make assumptions. It's a shame to start an audit and then prolong it for more than you anticipated just because you're not properly prepared, especially for the first round. I spoke with so many people in the industry and they said, work with a professional, especially in the first round, work with a professional, ask questions, train yourself, develop the mindset to make yourself ready for those audits beforehand. That's kind of the short list. I would probably find more if I think about it a bit.
Well, ours are some good ones.
Yeah.
And yeah, to that point, working with professionals for CMMC, it's such a high stakes assessment because it's a pre-award requirement once it goes into full effect. So you can imagine it can be a defense contractor, their organization is about to be awarded a multi-million-dollar contract.
Absolutely.
But now they haven't demonstrated their compliance with CMMC and it goes to someone else.
Yeah.
Stakes are high.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, I found myself falling in that trap as well. You make assumptions about the evidence you're providing, and in your mind that evidence is sufficient, but the auditor might not feel fully satisfied with what you're providing. And like yesterday, actually, I had a situation where the system where we keep our evidence, I exported the evidence I provided to the auditor, and the auditor said, there's another layer that I need of this. And I could have avoided that delay, that multiple day delay, if I knew that. And if I work with a specialist that, like knows very well what's generally expected, they would have said, what you provided is great, but you need this additional item. And especially when you have tight, deadlines and you're competing for high stake contracts.
Yeah, very high stakes. All right. I think this is fantastic, very valuable information providing. And I just love the unique twist where instead of just talking about it, now you actually were able to role play it, demonstrate how it's done, and then going above and beyond. You have various evidence that you created, and also you had the logo. So I'm hoping other SMEs that participate in this series, you set the bar high. But
Thank you.
If you receive value from this episode, I invite you to subscribe and like so that you're the first to know when we release new episodes. Also, check out CMMCproof.com to learn more about the arsenal of resources that we provide to equip you to conquer CMMC. We'll see you next time.